Hello, 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 everyone. Happy Thursday. Guys, we are very blessed and lucky to have Dr. Howard back. This is a reschedule for a live stream we were supposed to do a couple weeks ago, but Howard wasn't feeling well, but he's back in business. He's feeling good. Howard, are you ready to answer some questions today?
I'm ready and eager.
Awesome. Well, for anyone who might be new to this channel or new to Howard, Howard and I have a series of ongoing discussions about just what Trump Derangement Syndrome is, just from a psychological level. Howard is a psychotherapist out in the Los Angeles area. He has written a fabulous book called A Loose Grip, and it gives you lots of insight into the idea of derangement and what it is, because we both agree that it is a very, very real phenomenon. And we've done a series of chats on this channel to that effect. Now, today, what we thought we would do is just kind of open it up for questions. And you guys have sent in a ton of really good questions. And of course, we'll try to take as many questions in the chat that we can as well. But Howard, one of the things that when I put out the call for questions for this conversation, one of the things that I always get is, I don't even want to bother trying to talk to my friends and family members with Trump derangement syndrome. Like, I don't need any advice. I'm just not going to bother. So can you give us some insight into why that might not be the best strategy in the world?
Yeah, by first validating their feelings. I know a lot about the comments that are made when we get into this subject, and a lot of people say, "Gee, why bother? What's the point of talking to a brick wall?" And their instinct is actually correct. But it doesn't end there. Okay, so this is going to be a difficult thing.
I was like, that wasn't the answer I was hoping for.
I always do that, don't I?
Yes.
No, the instinct is actually correct. It's because look, I'm a psychotherapist. I can't do my work with people unless they're actually interested in what I have to offer. Unless there are people who actually come to therapy to not get better, and you've got to weed that out. Otherwise, all you're going to be doing is beating your head against that wall. So not everybody. Therapy and counseling can do great, but it also can't do anything unless the people who are seeking or say they want to seek your services are open to what the resource is. So in the same way, you can't tell somebody something who doesn't want to hear it. And so that's why I'm validating it. I want them to understand that it is an uphill battle, and their chances are they can do everything right, even with the best kind of communication skills, compassion, and understanding, and still come out in a very unsatisfying way. But now what I said was, but I don't want to stop there. I want to recognize that this is an issue. It's very daunting, but I believe in life you have to have, to be well with yourself, you have to have an open door policy. Today, they're closing the door. I'm going to leave mine open if they want to come in. And there's a percentage of time times that people who haven't come into that door that you've left open, it could be after a year, it could be after 10 years, it could be after 20 years. They actually come through that door, and they'll tell you, thanks for keeping that door open. So if that's valuable to you, that in other words, it's a heartbreak that you can't get the results you'd like to today. But is it meaningful and valuable to you that maybe someday somebody might open up to where you were at? And that's how I look at it, is to run your life like an open door policy. Maybe not today they'll come through, maybe tomorrow they will.
Mm-hmm. And how I like to think about it too is, if I feel like I'm not going to like the outcome, no matter what happens or no matter what I try, what I try to do is change the metric of success. I change the definition of what success looks like. And so
Absolutely.
for me, if I was trying to have a conversation with someone like my mother, for example, who has massive TDS, like I can't have my metric of success be, is my mother going to come around today? Because chances are she's probably not, and I've just set myself up for a complete disappointment. But what if I change my metric of success to be, you know what, I want to make sure that I did everything I could so that I can look myself in the mirror and know that I played my part. We are responsible for 50% of every relationship that we have. You are responsible for half of it. I'm responsible for half of it. I've got to do my part. And if I'm not doing my part, then that is on me first and foremost. And so if I can change my metric of success to be like, I'm going to do my part because I want to be able to know emphatically I did everything I could, and whether or not she responds to it is her business, that I think makes it a little bit easier.
That's perfectly said, because here's the idea. I've got my ideas. I'm going to tell you them, and if I tell you them well enough, you're going to go, wow, aren't you smart? I agree with you. That's a stupid goal. Okay. I mean, it's an understandable goal, but it's not realistic. And it's all I can do to get people to understand that people think differently. They approach issues and problems differently. There's a lot of overlap about how humans think, but there's also just so much diversity about how people approach things, how they frame an issue, how they understand it, what their value set is. I mean, it's a very complex matrix. So the idea that I have a thought and I've thought it through so well that obviously when I tell you, you're going to go, wow, I agree with that. That's just an absurd idea. Abandon that completely. You should always approach a situation from, I'm not trying to convince this person of what I know and what they ought to know the same way. What I want to do is I want to engage this person in a process of understanding. That's what you're trying to do. That's your goal. If you come away that you don't agree with the person, but you have a measure of understanding that's higher, and if both of you have a measure of understanding that's higher, that is a success.
I definitely agree with that. So we're just going to jump into questions because we have a lot of them. Now, guys, I asked for questions in a couple of different places. We are going to start off by taking questions from my locals community. And I want to start off with locals for a couple of reasons. First off, my locals community is part of the reason that I can spend so much time making content for you guys, and their support is essential for me. It's also just a great place to be on social media. So if you haven't yet joined my locals, the information is in the description below. But Howard, you now have a locals community as well. And I wanted to have a chance for us to talk about what your locals community is and what you're hoping to do there.
Thank you for mentioning it. I felt a little embarrassed the last time I was on. I'm not as sharp on media that you are. You're very, very good. And you know me, I'm not complimenting you. That's an observation. You make a good connection. And so people were asking, so how can they, find me and all that? And I did have a website for my book, but I've now just launched a new website. I've joined the locals, so I'm going to have my own locals channel. And I also write on medium.com. All of these things you introduced me to, by the way. So it's a resource. And what I'm going to do on my community is I'm going to challenge intellect. I don't want to accept what I've been told. I want to process data and information. We go off the rails way too easily. You and I have started a series on derangement, and it's affecting the country as a whole. It's not just affecting an individual. Certainly, you can point to individuals and say, this person's got derangement. We are deranged as a country. We don't think clearly. We buy into things that are absolutely absurd and ridiculous. So what I'm going to attempt to do is break down the components of how to look at things clearly, sensibly. Of course, that will relate to, what your mental health is. Mental health requires that you have good cognitive sensibilities. And we as a country right now are in a mental health crisis. Quite literally, I don't mean to overstate things. I think that's accurate, and it's reflected in the political arena and the election cycle.
So, guys, if that's something you're interested in being a part of, I know I cannot wait. I'm already in it, I think. So please go and join Howard's local community below. His website is also listed, so all of his information is there. And before we get into questions, I'm just gonna go off of Sherry here. Guys, hit the like button if you're happy to have Dr. Howard back on this channel answering your questions. It lets YouTube know that I'm not a channel that they should be banning in any way, shape, or form. And that really helps me out. It makes me happy. So I appreciate that. So smash that like button, guys. All right, Howard, let's jump into questions from my locals community. I just want to make sure I have the most recent list here. Ooh, we got a whole bunch of them. All right. We're going to start off with Lindenbrook. Lindenbrook says the TDSers versus those non-infected seem like both sides are struggling for the higher moral ground. Is there another way to look at this scenario to help us understand it better? If I find someone that actually wants to have a real discussion, I don't think it's a good look to come off as being morally superior, or that my opinions are more right than the opinions the other person might hold. What do you think, Howard?
Yeah, that's a really good premise. One of the things, I mean, this just fits with everything I've been saying, and in my introduction on the locals, I talk about the false and misleading virtue arena. What's happening is you approach an issue with, I'm the one that has a higher moral high ground. I have a moral high ground. You don't. What's wrong with you? So you've just stopped the communication right there. You're done. They've done that with Trump. Part of the essence of Trump derangement is that he's a monster. He's a racist. He's a xenophobe. He's all those kinds of things. So where are you going to go with a conversation? Once you've already said that the person doesn't even have a right to be considered an individual, a person, what are you going to say to this person once you start to attack the morality? Not look, ethics, morals, and values are absolutely critical. But if you start off with, I've got the moral high ground, you don't, so I'm going to now tell you everything that you should think of, and if you don't bend the knee, if you don't bow down, if you don't agree with it, you and I talk a lot about the critical racial theory. I mean, once you're born, whatever skin color that you have, it's done. There is no moraling. You're just born with your morals, either good or bad. So yes, you want to approach the issue not from I'm better than you. You want to approach the issue as I want to understand what your position is. I want to have a grasp of it so that I give it all the consideration. Since you thought of it, I want to consider the things that you've went through to get to the position that you're at.
And I think it's really important that people go into these conversations understanding that you can have a conversation with someone to try to understand their perspective, but that does not mean you have to agree with them. And that is something I've seen come up. Like someone was asking me today on Twitter, I said something about Ben Shapiro, because Ben Shapiro is really not happy that Trump was like opting out of this second virtual debate, whatever. And I responded, I said, all Trump really needs to do is go on Joe Rogan and this like whole election will be over in like a heartbeat. But someone responded to me and said, Carlin, I don't understand how you can push back on Ben Shapiro when you said he was part of your journey of coming out of Trump derangement syndrome. And my response was that I don't need to agree with everything Ben Shapiro says in order to listen to him and to try to understand his perspective. And I feel like that's a lost art in a lot of this is we become so focused on trying to convince other people of our perspective that we haven't taken a moment to say, okay, maybe there are just valid ways to look at the world differently, and it would benefit me as a human being to understand different ways to look at the world.
Yeah, it's I think a critical mistake. I've been in more than a few conversations where it starts off that someone asks me, "What do you think about global warming, global change, climate change?" And right away, what I'm doing is I'm being virtue measured. If I say I believe in it and it's man-made, and if I say all the right things, then I'm they can pass me as a human being and go to the next, whatever just part of the discussion. And so these are virtue tests. And what do you think about what Ben Shapiro said? Well, if they're curious, that's fine. But if it's a virtue test, then it's a problem. What do you think about gun control? What do you think about the abortion issue? What do you think about, people will ask those questions in the beginning to test you as to, your virtue level. And of course, if you don't pass the test, then you'll be canceled, and then there won't be any curiosity about why you may think something. Carlin, you just said something a while ago, and I liked it. And you said, gee, I didn't expect that answer from you. I think you've said that more than a few times when you've asked me a question. Okay, but because you're not testing me on my virtue, I mean, we've never had that.
Right.
What you are is you're curious, and now I've given you another doorway to think about something that you may not have thought before. Mm-hmm. Do you think that thought innovation comes when you would be open to hearing something that you hadn't looked at that way before? And the whole of my work that I've ever done is I always strive to look for the doorway or the entry that nobody's ever gone through before. I value that. I think certainly I can go through a doorway and it doesn't get me where I thought I might go, but I'm willing to try it. And when I engage people, I'm asking them, you want to look at a doorway? Have you ever thought of this before? And maybe I mess with people's mind. My wife would say something like, oh my God, I forgot. And I said, no, you remembered.
I
And
love that.
And yeah, right. And so I'm always, if you know me, I'm always looking for other doorways. Now, if that bothers you, you're not going to want to talk to me. You're going to want me to always go through the same doorway in the same way and check off the boxes. And I guess I'm inviting people to consider other people's pathways, other people's doorways. It may show you more about yourself than you would otherwise wouldn't understand. And so I consider those things valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the things, and we're going to move on to the next question here, but I think this is an interesting point. I think one of the things that's helped me to remain open and curious of other people's perspectives is really practicing mindfulness very much in my daily life, which I have done for years and years and years. I wrote a whole book about mindfulness at work, and one of the principles that is foundational to my mindfulness practice is practicing non-judgment, not looking at something and immediately saying, oh, this is the best thing ever, or oh, this is the worst thing ever. And I think that's one of the worst things that people can do is, and it's almost automatic when you're not being mindful of it, is we instantly make these judgments about things as being good or bad. And that judgment is going to directly dictate how you respond to that thing. If you judge something as bad or wrong, or you judge this person as an evil person because they don't agree with you on environmental policy or something like that, you're going to have a very different reaction than if you're just like, okay, well, this is your position. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. Let's explore why that is. And so mindfulness for me, I think, was probably one of the key things that got me out of Trump Derangement Syndrome, because I was really evolving in how I was perceiving other people's positions on things.
Well, you know what you just touched on? You touched on that the core of that has to do with insecurity. If I'm secure in what I understand and know, I'm not going to become insecure because you've told me something different than what I thought of. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm going to look at that as an opportunity to either, you know what, I never thought about it that way. I feel comfortable to abandon what I was thinking because you made a compelling issue, or I can add to it so that my ideas are more refined, or what you say to me isn't so compelling and I'm still good with what I've been thinking. So if I'm insecure, I'm going to feel, when you bring up a different way of looking at something, my insecurity is going to cause me to be judgmental. And how dare you? I mean, it has to, because it causes a crisis. That's another component of the derangement, is they don't want to be confronted with the ideas that you have, because now where do they go with that? They'll disintegrate. Now, of course, they don't have to, but they've cornered themselves in such a position. They've created such cognitive dissonance that it creates a crisis when you say something like, yeah, I can see what people say about Trump, but when I hear him, he doesn't sound so bad. That they don't hear that. They just hear, oh my God, what am I going to do with that? How am I going to live to my next moment? Because I was tied to the idea that this guy's a monster. And somebody just said, who looked, I thought they were a human being, said, I don't know, I like what Trump said. That causes a crisis for these people, as opposed to, I don't agree with him, but oh well.
I think it especially causes a crisis when someone who's black says it, to be honest. But maybe we'll get
Oh,
into that. Like
oh,
an epic crisis. It's like,
what women who are black, who say something like, I like Trump. I think he did a good job with whatever it was. These are courageous people to speak up that way.
yes.
And I believe there's a lot of them who aren't speaking up. That's why when you look at the election, there may be some surprises that the deranged will go, I don't know where this came from. Well, they don't know because they haven't been looking at it.
They haven't been looking and they don't want to listen. All right, we're going to go to our next question. And this is a long question. It's a bit of a wordy question, so I have a little bit of reading to do. But, hang on. Before I cough and hack into the microphone. This is from Bluebird Heart in my local community. She says, Dr. Howard Asher, my relationship with my brother-in-law has been strained since the 2016 election over Trump, but it was at least tolerable. We could avoid talking about politics and Trump and focus on real life things that we could agree upon. But now in 2020, the relationship is all but impossible since COVID-19 and George Floyd. Every aspect of our lives is now political. And if I ever try to engage in any of it, they try to say anything to hurt me instead of engaging on the topic. If I explain why critical race theory or white privilege is racist, they say I'm accusing them of being racist, which is not my intent at all. One bystander or another on my in-laws page went so far as I am not even a person worth knowing, and no one came to my defense. And in fact, my brother-in-law dogpiled on me further. It's also a strain on my marriage somewhat because my husband is very close with my brother and wants us to have a relationship, but at this time, I don't really feel safe engaging with him or his wife. They're both my husband's best friends. On really any topics, it's like walking on eggshells. I guess my question is this. How do you best decide whether or not it's worth engaging in a conversation with someone? Are there any tricks you can give me on my approach that would minimize the risk of vicious attacks? And I read the whole thing, honestly, because I think that that's something that a lot of people are experiencing very similar things right now. So what would you say, Howard?
Well, as you're writing it, my heart was breaking because it is common. It's, I only wish that was an odd kind of a thing. And she's not alone. So let me try to dissect this because there was a lot in there. It was well written, and I guess I want to send her some kind of support. Just hey, you're okay, hang in there. One of the problems with her family is she's already outed. They've identified her, and so what happens is, oh boy, part of the derangement has to do with the obsession. It's not enough for deranged people to just have their opinions. They send you articles and texts and news clips, and they're all the stuff that makes the point. Here's what he said the other day. Here's what happened. I can't believe it. And so they barrage you with all this stuff. And it's deranged because the whole idea is that if you're a person, a thoughtful person who's considered all this stuff, it's not like you're going to read that stuff and go, oh, boy, I'm glad I have people in my life who can send me this stuff. I better start changing my ways. So the whole thing is absurd to begin with. So these people will not only have their opinions, but they want to obsess on it. And in her family, she's the one they've got to go after. So it may start off kind of civil and friendly at a gathering. Sooner or later, someone says, "Yeah, that thing that Trump did," or whatever, and then they'll look at her and they'll want her to explain Trump. Well, what do you think about that? I mean, you for certain you cannot hold on to that opinion you used to have. I mean, they actually think that you now are been humbled and humiliated, and it's time for you to go, I got it all wrong. I was sarcastic one time at a gathering, and someone brought up something, and I said, I tried to pull it off to not sound. Well, you try to hit the tone right whenever you're talking. And I just said, yeah, Trump he really messed up that time. I had it all wrong. And everyone looked at me knowing that I was bullshit. We're not supposed to.
That's okay. That's all right. We'll survive.
I was BSing, okay? And I was, and these are people who knew me, and so I was playing with them, and I sort of have some good positive cred with people, so I can do that and kind of get away with it. But it's not foolproof. I could do that, and someone could, try to slam me for being disingenuous, or why can't you see what we see? So I forgot the name of the person, but anyway, she's being targeted for this. And what my recommendation would be is, unless you want to venture into getting sarcastic, that's a call that you want to make if you want to like stir it up a little bit. But if you're trying to keep it really civil, and they look to you to say, now have you seen the light? Now have you come around? Because that's what they're doing. What I would recommend is saying something so neutral. It's not foolproof that it'll get you through it, but it's so neutral is you just basically say, I'm always interested to hear anything, particularly if it's different than what I was thinking.
So say that one again, just to make sure people get it. I'm always interested to hear anything that is different than what I'm thinking. Do I have that right?
Yes, I'm always interested to hear any information that I need to hear, particularly if it's different than what I was thinking. Mm-hmm. What that does is it disarms what are they going to say to you? They're looking for a fight. They're either, you will say to them, I get it, you're right, and then they won't believe you anyway. So I don't even know why you would even agree with it. But you could either do that and they say, okay, we finally, transformed you, or you say, no, I don't agree with you. And then you're going to get into an argument. So you avoid the argument. You just say, I'm always interested in getting information about things I need to know, particularly about the things I disagree with. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it has the best chance of neutralizing the group, because they won't, what could they say? But it can leave open the next part of the discussion. And this is a recommendation I would make, is that however you think about an issue, person who you're talking to, are you aware that people think about things differently, and that's normal? It's normal that people can have a different take on things. I expect that in people. Don't you?
I don't think they'd like that too much.
You don't think that'd work, huh?
I don't think they would appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I'm cornered because I don't know what to say to these people. I already started off. We're called them deranged, so we don't have much to work with there, do we? Mm-hmm. So it's basically a heartbreak. And I guess what I'm trying to suggest is anything that you could think of that can neutralize the situation. Unless you want to venture into an argument, and sometimes you do, but mostly it's probably not advisable. I think you want to back off to something very neutral, such as, like what I said, I always want to get information, particularly I like to hear from things that are different than what I think.
You know what it reminds me of is something that my coach Joshua always says to me, which is what resists persists. Like as soon as you resist something, as soon as you start to fight it and push
Yeah,
back on it, then you're just going to make it a bigger problem than it actually is. So you have to find a way to kind of flow with the situation and not push back so aggressively. So what I like about this strategy of saying I'm always interested in getting new information, especially from people or on topics that we might disagree on, like you're not resisting at that
right.
point. You're trying to flow with them and you're leaving an opening for there to actually be a productive dialogue.
You're also modeling good listening, which is basically, so I want to do that. Can you do that for me?
Mm,
I mean, the implication is if I'm going to do that. Now, again, the derangement may say it only goes one way. No, you have to listen to me. And so the the thing is that communication is a lot about modeling. You want what you're putting out, okay? And you can't do it unless you're demonstrating openness. Now, I said something to you the other day, the other time we spoke, and I want to repeat it. It's very critical. The person who was writing about that, it sounds like, in a group situation, you don't want to be the one person in a group where you've got 10 people at you who, it's the grand inquisition. That's a terrible situation. And sometimes I found myself in that. I mean, you just walk into something and you get a whole pile-on dynamic going on. What I
yes.
recommend is if you're going to have any serious discussion, have it with one person. Don't
Mhm.
have it with a group.
Live to fight until you have one person in front of you that you can communicate with.
Yes.
All right. Anya wants to know what would be an ultimate question to start a conversation with someone with Trump derangement syndrome? What kind of subjects are not triggering, and what can lead to a productive conversation as opposed to an argument?
So do I understand she wants to know how to start a discussion?
Yeah, I think she wants to start a discussion that is actually going to be a productive dialogue.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then she started with something like, what wouldn't be triggering? And I'm thinking
Yes.
like, yeah, I think,
I think any topic would be
yeah.
triggering. I don't think there's
I
any
just
topic that would
I
not be
don't think
triggering.
there's nothing that couldn't be triggered. You could talk about unicorns and it'll trigger somebody.
Yeah.
So so I want to answer the question as best I possibly can. It still comes from a neutral position, which is basically you open up a conversation avoiding what your position is. In other
Mhm.
words, if you think, you know, Trump said something really ridiculous the other day. Yeah, you must have thought so too. So what do you think? Tell me what you think. That's set up. The premise is already there. If you're going to open up a question, avoid being a premise. In the debate, whoever was the debate moderator,
Mhm.
the first question was an inappropriate question.
It was not a question, it was a statement.
With a statement, she said the pandemic is out of control. That was the
Mhm.
premise. Now, by the way, there are people who could say, I agree with that premise that the pandemic's out of control. But you could have just as easily said, given uh, the nature and the dynamic of the pandemic, it's very well under control. You could have opened up the question either way. But you see, the point I'm making is if you want to enter into a discussion, avoid having a premise. You know, I mean, it sounds like very, very neutral, almost so, like there's no substance there. But you're asking a challenging question. So it means that you have to. What's an example of how you might talk about? I don't know. Okay, this election cycle is. I was going to say fascinating. Well, that's already a premise. This election cycle, really is bringing out a lot of emotions. What do you think? I
Mhm.
mean, I think that's a fairly neutral question, and you don't know what direction it's going to go in. And I suppose that's the other part of it. You can't have an agenda where you want the discussion to go. If you open it up, it's going to go wherever it goes. So this is more not what's the best kind of question to ask. It's more about have your expectations in check.
Mm-hmm.
That's a better way to understand it. There's a million possible questions that could possibly be neutralized, but what's more key is that you have your expectations in check. People can say something incredibly insulting or outrageous or ridiculous, or you may find connection. They'll say something, inspirational and insightful. So it could be anything. And so don't have expectations one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Brian asked a really great super chat. He says, Dr. Asher, what's your opinion on white fragility / critical race theory and how that relates to listening to new information that's coming from a different perspective?
So I don't know if he's watched our previous conversations, but you should be pretty aware of my opinion of critical race theory. I think it's destructive. I think it's racist. I think it's been exploited and causing abuse on people. I mean, I think it's a bad thing. Critical race theory. I also want to say, like I shouldn't have to, I hate racism. I'm against racism. Okay. So being against critical race theory is not for racism. So, and that gets lost in the discussion so much. Trump just defunded government involvement in critical race theory. And of course, I was thrilled and knew right away that it would be misunderstood by so many people as, oh, that means he's racist. And if anything, it means the opposite of it.
Right.
So this is my way of saying that. To answer your question, I think it's a terrible thing, critical race theory. I forgot the rest of the question though.
Okay. The rest of the question is, how does it relate to listening to new information that's coming from a different perspective? And I think what he might be getting at is, one of the premises of white fragility, right, is that, all white people are fragile. And the more you protest and you say, I'm not fragile just because I'm white, they say, oh, then you're really racist. That you're just really demonstrating your white fragility. So it really doesn't leave, like, the whole philosophy behind white fragility doesn't leave any room for discussion. It doesn't leave any room for dialogue. It's just like, okay, you're a white person. Are you a little fragile or are you really fragile? And that's it.
Yeah, perfectly said. What it does, what does it do to conversations? It stops them. You're done. Critical race theory, that you're whatever race you are, there's no reason to talk anymore. Enough said. So it's the most canceling, it's the most destructive, it's the most stupid and absurd thing that there is. So what critical race theory does is it stops all thinking.
I think it's a very good way to put it. Critical race theory stops all thinking. Dominic, I'm going to mispronounce your name, but I know who you are. Dominic from Locals asks, my aunt naturally red-pilled during COVID lockdowns. Our governor's antics woke her up. However, she has slipped back into her old ways and quite literally re-caught Trump Derangement Syndrome. She has abruptly stopped talking to my family, and since she knows we lean right. How do you get through someone who was once red-pilled but then decided to close their eyes again? What a great question.
I never had that question before. I actually thought once you red-pilled, you sort of got immunity because once you come over. So that's a novel consideration. So sometimes the questions lead me to have more questions. I wanted to know what got her. Did he mention what triggered her back?
No, he didn't. I don't think. Let me just double check. But no, she just abruptly recaught it again.
Yeah. So we got to do some trace. What do they call that? We got to find out
Contact tracing
it again.
So I almost wonder if it's kind of like makes me think of Brett Weinstein, right? And I have a tremendous amount of respect for Brett Weinstein. I think Brett Weinstein is great. I think he's a super smart guy. Brett Weinstein went through probably one of the most epic red pillings that someone could have possibly gone through in terms of what happened to him at Evergreen State University and the fallout from that. But at the same time, he still hangs on to Trump derangement syndrome. And I feel like there are a lot of people, Barry Weiss would probably be another person, and frankly, Brett Weinstein's brother Eric will probably be another person, who I think that they have some grasp on reality, much more so than a lot of people with Trump derangement syndrome. I would say in some respects they were maybe a little bit red pilled, but they still hate Trump so much that they just can't let it go.
Yeah, I have a theory about that. What's his name? Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz. Mm-hmm. He wasn't red pilled, but he sure did come to the intellectual side of this whole issue of the political spectrum. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. He even during
he literally defended Trump.
Yeah, he defended Trump at the impeachment. You can't come over much more. And he voted for Hillary, and all of that. So Dershowitz, I would say, is still a liberal Democrat, mm-hmm. But intellectually, to his credit, he's looking at the arguments about the various aspects of the political spectrum, and of course he was creamed for it because he then wasn't pure. That's the other thing about derangement, is it requires purity. So my theory about people who come over, red pilled, is that some of them will still stay on the side of where they came from to try to influence from within. If you go completely outside, then you got to say to the people you used to be with, you're on the wrong side, come over here. I was Democrat for a long time, and then I started to see stuff that just didn't fit. I was challenged. I was challenged with what I was seeing, and I remained. I'm an independent now. I'm not in any party, but I remained in the Democratic Party registered for maybe 10 years longer than I would have been, because I thought, if I really feel strongly about the things that I feel, I should convince the party I relate to from within, mm-hmm. as opposed to coming outside the party and saying, you guys, you got it all wrong, because I didn't see things in black and white. So my theory goes is that they're people who may hold on to their loyalties, because if they do start to see some strengths in the other side that they weren't a part of, they want to stay within the party that they care about to try to improve it. Mm-hmm. And what happens is, it's funny about this big tent idea. It's like you can get so big tent in a party that your party doesn't mean anything anymore. Now it's just everybody, and everybody thinks everything. So that's one of the interesting things, difficult things about party politics, is they want to get as many people into their party, but if you get so many people that you dilute the ideas that the party's foundationally about, and I don't have an answer for it. I just think it's a challenge to all political ideology and where you are trying to fall on the spectrum. So I don't know if I was clear about that, but that was my theory about how people, can red pill but still have allegiance to the other side.
Well, we have actually, Dom is actually in the chat, so he's given us some more information, which I think is great. He says, my cousin, my aunt's daughter, is a nurse in LA. She then gave my aunt COVID brain, and my aunt, I think, couldn't stand up for her new beliefs, so she regressed. I mean, what he's describing, it kind of sounds to me like, at least for me, my experience with coming out of like Trump derangement syndrome, it was a process, right? It did not happen overnight. A lot of people think it happened as soon as I went to the Trump rally. That is completely not true. It happened over a long period of time. And even after I came out of it, there were still parts of me that was like, I'm never voting for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is awful. Like, so it was a process. And I think that, I think it's natural for people to regress when they're changing their minds.
Yes. And as you were talking, and from the question that from the clarification I got, I have an answer. When you change your thinking, when you go, wow, I got it. There's another way to think about this, and I want to think the new way. It's not enough just to say I'm on the new team. You have to create language. You have to articulate it in your head as to what that new team is. So sometimes you join the, I'm putting it in the metaphorically, when you join the new team, you can't just put on the uniform without knowing what the uniform's about. And if you put that uniform on and someone says, well, so tell me why you changed, and change the subject a little bit. Do you know how many times people can't explain what they feel and think?
Oh, all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And if they leave that part weak in their understanding, if they don't develop the articulation and the words, talking points, if you will, they're going to fall short when they're challenged, either naturally or aggressively. If they're challenged, they won't be able to speak for what they claim that they're for. And if they can't speak to it, then it's going to be weak, and they're going to float back again. One of the things that I bring up on my locals, I did a video, is I said you need to develop a language to support the way you think, because if you don't do that, you won't solidify. So wokeism developed a language. Wokeism, said that
Literally developed a language.
they developed a language, and that's why it has a hold on people, because Black Lives Matter, right? Well, who's going to argue that no one's going to say Black Lives doesn't matter? But that's the language that they developed that stands for a lot of other things beyond Black Lives Matter that may not have anything to do with what you really think. But you could, if you hold on to the Black Lives part, then you think, okay, well, there's no argument with that. But that's a language concoction. That isn't actually a philosophy. So I want to be clear about this. When you think of a philosophy, you need to be able to, as if you were a teacher, you need to be able to instruct it, not only to yourself, but if you're willing to have discussions with other people, and they say, so why do you think, why do you like Trump? You better have a good reason. Otherwise, if you babble about it, you'll start to wonder why you do like Trump. And that creates a tension and a crisis. So underscore, you need to develop language to articulate what you assert.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, guys, we've got a couple more questions from my locals community. And as always, I do always take questions from local supporters first, so they don't have to get my attention with a super chat. So if you are watching right now and you are a supporter in my locals community, you can actually go in and find the comment thread for Ask Dr. Howard for today, and you can post a comment there asking a question. As always, Howard is on locals as well. So if you're going over to my locals, you may as well just join Howard's locals in the process. The information is in the description below. And if you're enjoying this chat so far, listen, guys, we have over 600 people here. I don't even see 300 likes. So if you are enjoying this chat so far, please give us a thumbs up so that YouTube knows that this is good things, this good content that lots of people should watch. And occasionally I even use proper grammar. All right, we have a question from Phaedra here. Phaedra says, first, some context. My eldest daughter, I think, who is 28, has gone far, far, far left since being with her longtime boyfriend. She has informed me that my opinions, etc., cross her boundaries, and basically I'm not allowed to share my thoughts, likes, etc., because of said boundary. This comment was said to me after her outrage of a song I shared, by the way. She had asked to come over on Sunday to talk, socially distanced, which is shocking to me. She's been isolating from people unless at a Black Lives Matter protest, because as we all know, you can't get COVID at a Black Lives Matter protest. My question, how can I best show her love when she is in such a deranged and programmed state? That's a great question.
It is, and again, it's one of those things where I want to know more about it. If I understood, she became more that way after she had this boyfriend.
Yes, it seems so. Yes.
Yeah, so she's got an influence in her life that's prominent, and that's a triangulated situation. She's not only dealing with her daughter, but she's dealing with the boyfriend in
Mhm.
some way. So it's just another layer of complication. Um, I maybe I didn't pick up on it. Is she asking how to handle the situation from here on out?
Well, she's saying, how can I best show my love to my daughter when she is in a deranged and programmed state? So I think that I'm gonna base this off of just conversations I've had with Phaedra too, because we have weekly live chats in my locals community, and so I kind of know a little bit more about this. I think that, Phaedra, I think, feels very like, I think she doesn't feel as though she can express her opinions and her beliefs around her daughter. But of course, she still loves her daughter. She still wants there to be a relationship with her daughter. And I think that she's struggling to understand, how can I have that relationship when what can I do to make sure that relationship maintains on some level rather than my daughter just cutting me off.
Yeah, it means that she can't share her deep beliefs and values about certain things, and she has to talk about neutral issues. She
Mhm.
has to talk about, hey, how did the Dodgers do? Whatever neutral topics there are in her life. What's tragic about that is it it's it makes the relationship less deep, but she still has the fond feelings for her, and the daughter even made it clear that certain issues are out of bounds. And so, but I like the open door policy, which is basically, okay, we don't have to do that, but whenever you may want to, I'm happy to do that. That's the way you respect the person's boundaries, but you hold open the possibility that when they're ready, if they're ever ready, that you're more than happy to talk about those deep issues.
Mhm.
By the way, that's powerful. That is a way of saying I care about you because you're you, and that's the message that you're wanting to give. That issues aside, you're my daughter, and that's what she wants to convey. You respect her for saying there are boundaries. You respect her for saying that there are issues she doesn't want to get into, and you say no problem. Whenever you might want to, though, I'm here.
Mhm. Jazz Pow has a kind of a similar question, but I think it's important we address it. They ask, "What's your advice on dealing/living with a left-leaning significant other? She threatens me with divorce and gets extremely emotional when discussing topics such as Trump, race, COVID, etc." Howard, I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from people that basically say the same thing, that say something to the effect of, my I have been married for 20 years and it's been great up until Trump, and now we disagree on Trump and I'm about to get a divorce because of this issue. What advice do you have for people in that situation?
Well, the complexity of that is all over the place. I mean, without the Trump issue or the political issues, I want to know the state of their relationship otherwise.
Mhm.
Now, it would be hard for me. I could barely imagine that they would say, we have the perfect relationship in all ways, except for politically, we're, at each other's throats. So, and you're nodding, recognizing.
That was gonna be one of my questions, is like, was there really no other problems, or is this just exacerbating something else that's already there?
Yeah, yeah, that's my. Look, I will hold out the possibility, very rare, that they have this great relationship. But other than that, and that's an interesting topic in and of itself. But I believe that the vast majority of situations are they've got other issues that go beyond politics, and politics is certainly going to be a flashpoint for making it even worse. Okay,
Mhm.
so but I'm not done with that question. Um, I, I would want to know if that person is also feeling like, I've kind of had it with this relationship. So it isn't so much was it a she'll leave me. I don't know if I want to be around. I would want to assess their commitment to wanting to be there. Now, if the answer were yeah, I'm kind of feeling wobbly about wanting to be in the relationship too, as opposed to I, whatever my wife thinks politics or this, I still love her. I still want to be with her. So I would want to be able to assess that, because if it's the first one, it's kind of wobbly. That they need to explore where they want to take this relationship. If it's more like whatever she is, that's really a problem for me, I still want to hang in there, I love her, then she's got to do what we were talking about before, which is basically avoid all the bad issues, don't make any presumptions about anything, and that my reason for being with you is because you're you.
I want to show Ron Williams here, not because he's like asking a question, but I just love his look what he did. He put a fly on his head photo.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and he's saying something serious, but Ron, I was just really amused at the fly.
We all knew the fly meme. We knew the fly won. The fly won the debate.
Well, Mike Pence won the debate. The fly was the cherry on top of the debate. But I want to say this too. I want to say so a lot of people often ask me about my relationship with my husband and how how it survived me coming out of Trump derangement syndrome or having Trump derangement syndrome. And what I always tell people is politics was just not a part of my marriage, to be honest. It just wasn't something that we really ever discussed. And when I finally started coming out of it, and my husband was like, "Carlin, you should watch Ben Shapiro. You'd like Ben Shapiro," because he was always much more into that stuff than I did. I had no idea that my husband was more conservative than me, because it was just not something I would have Rachel Maddow playing in the background at night. He would be playing video games on his computer or something. It just wasn't a part of our relationship. And I think you can have a great relationship and a really healthy relationship without politics even playing a role in it if you want to.
It usually doesn't.
Yeah.
Overall, I mean, not everybody, but usually you're in with politics. But I am curious about something. It didn't come up much, but what did you assume, if you allowed yourself to assume what his politics were before the coming out? What did you assume he thought?
Well, and you know exactly what I'm going to say, I think, which is I assumed he more or less agreed with me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, thank you for sharing,
Mm-hmm.
because this shows, how many times do I say, don't assume people think like you do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a in some ways it's just very chauvinistic. It's you can
Well, I can be a little
imagine.
full of myself, Howard.
What's that?
I can be a little full of myself.
Oh, me too. you know, and to the extent we can afford it, then indulge being full of yourself. But when you get serious, when you go into any kind of issue, don't assume people think what you think. I don't know if you've noticed it, but I talk. I have a certain way of doing it, and I guess every now and then I'll ask you, does that make sense? And there's a reason I'm doing that. I'm doing a reality check. I don't make perfect sense to me. I live in my world. That's exactly how I see things. That's exactly how I do things. But for a moment, I think to myself, maybe she doesn't see it that way. So I'm not asking you to agree with me. It's a real question. Does that make sense? And am I in the realm of what you see that I see? And those are reality checks. Those I encourage people, think what you think it hard, think it well, own it, but don't assume everybody else thinks like you do. Don't project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth Barlow in Locals has this question. She says, I noticed that while talking to Trump derangement syndrome people, they tend to gaslight others when talking to them. For example, my stepfather used my autism against me when I tried to argue and show him what's going on. He thinks I'm radical because of my obsessive qualities, and I noticed this with other TDSers. Is this common with cult-like minds to call other people crazy when they're the ones being unreasonable?
Yes, yes. The technique, if you could call it that, is to take a quality and turn it back on you. Okay. So you mentioned autism. So you would have your ideas, and instead of going, oh, okay, there's an idea for you. Oh, what they did was they turned something and said, well, maybe you think that because of autism.
Yeah.
Maybe you think that because you're a man. Maybe you think that because you come from Idaho. Maybe you see where this goes. That the derangement, instead of hearing the thing in good faith, what they do is they think something's flawed there, and you should evaluate. You should take a hard look at your flaws, because maybe you said something based on the flaw that you have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, and we have one more question from locals, and then, guys, I'm going to be opening it up to the chat. So if you have a question for Dr. Howard, make sure you send in that super chat and get it on the list. Otherwise, I do have other questions to go through, but I will be taking super chat questions next after the locals questions. This is from Team Wade in locals, and this is a really relevant question considering what is going on in New York right now. She asked, most of my Jewish relatives hate Trump and the right so much. They love Cuomo and the left, which I do not understand given what Cuomo is doing in New York, but that's neither here nor there. And she's asking basically, like, why? Why is that? Why is that? Why do her Jewish relatives hate Trump so much and love Cuomo and the left so much when that's going on? She also says, also, we have found telling college age and college bound kids, and we'll begin to discuss if we talk about how restrictions under Biden may lead to more virtual school. Most of kids want to be on campus. It's a good starting point. So let's tackle the Jewish question, Howard. Why do you think Jews love like Cuomo and the left so much when I just don't get it?
Tradition.
Mm.
Right out of Fiddler on the Roof, tradition. They traditionally have been Democrats. They have Jews were traditionally hardcore Roosevelt supporters, which was interesting because Roosevelt sort of turned the other way when they were the information was getting out about the concentration camps. And I mentioned that because one of the things about being supporting a certain political position, it often happens that you're actually a part of a team that's not in your best interest. And now the thing is with conservative Jews or non-observant Jews, they are very liberal, Democrat liberal. Orthodox Jews, on the other hand, are very politically conservative. So, and you find the same thing with like a Hispanic. You find that Cuban Hispanics are very conservative.
Yes.
And so this is an interesting, kind of a thing, because this has to do with, why are you on the team that you're on when, the things you say you care about go against, the team you're on go against what you care about. By the way, the same thing can be, I don't want to get in trouble, but I mean, it doesn't make sense that blacks are disproportionately Democrat.
Yeah, I agree.
If you look at values, surveys that are done, blacks typically support so many of the conservative ideas. And so these are fascinating things. I mean, the political breakdown of how people find themselves in whatever group they're in is incredibly complicated and has less to do with their self-interest or even their values. It has mostly to do with branding. And so if something is branded a certain way, people flock to the brand, even if the brand is only a brand of a certain ideal. But if you do a deep dive, it has nothing to do with what the brand is saying. And it takes critical thinking to get to this place. So the Jews in New York are just traditionally, liberal Democrat. And Cuomo's, I'm saying, that just checks all the boxes off. And if you can ever take an individual aside and say, I know that you're for, you're a liberal Democrat, you've been that your whole life, you've never voted, beyond, your party, Roosevelt, all that kind of stuff. If you can get them to break it down to, well, do you know that, they're for this issue or that issue or whatever, and it starts to break down to where they have to wonder why they're in the party that they're in, they're not going to be convinced. They're going to shut down. They're going to start canceling because you're going to create a crisis for them. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because basically that's a good example of we've always been a liberal Democrat. You were that way. You were born into the liberal Democrat. You explained your story in the same way. And, once you were seeing things that told you that maybe your ideas weren't thought through enough, it wasn't like you just jumped ship.
No.
You still had loyalty to what you grew up in.
That's why I was so glad to hear Mike Pence last night flat out say, like, Trump has Jewish grandchildren. Like, I thought that was just so direct and so, like, his Jewish grandchildren, his daughter and his son-in-law are Jewish.
Yeah, you can't say it enough. That's not the first time it was said. I appreciated it too when he said that. It can't be said enough. But what is going on that this stuff is bouncing off of everyone's head? They were talking about the Charlottesville thing, which was, the good people on both sides. The next statement was, I condemn national whiteism or whatever the term was, KKK. It was in the very next thing, and they know it, which means, and this is even the insult for any political side to tell you something, knowing full well that what you're saying can be debunked easily, means that they're insulting their own voters, the people who vote for them. And again, how many times can you say, I wish people would wake up to say, if those things were true, I would have been on their side. I would have been on their side in a heartbeat, but they're not true.
Yeah. We've lost the ability to think critically. And that to me is one of the most terrifying things in this whole thing. And I get it. I get it because when I had Trump Derangement Syndrome, I was incredibly lazy around thinking around other topics. I was very focused on my business. I was very focused on what I was trying to do. And I was thinking critically in my business, but I was putting so much energy into that I just didn't have any left over to question everything that the news was telling me. So I get it on some level, but on a different level, it's how do we overcome this when people are just incapable of thinking critically about these questions?
Well, there is a way that it can be overcome, but you have to have enough of a platform with an individual to get them to stop and pause. They have to stop and pause. The way that you overcome it is to convey in some way, you know what? If you're willing to consider an idea that's different than you're not going to crumble. You'll be okay. You won't crumble. Now, a lot of people say, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not going to crumble. And this is, as a psychotherapist, I can confront a person at the right moment and say, think about that. When you think about this idea that I'm telling you has value that you ought to consider, what do you have to give up to consider that? And a lot of times I'll get a blank stare of recognition. Like they go, oh my God, So you reach a point where you say, it's okay. You could still be you. You could still have, your integrity. You can still have the values that you want to have, but it's not going to hurt you to think about something beyond the way that you've been thinking before. Now that's an abstract idea, what I just said. I might want to go back and recraft how I said that, but I'm trying to convey that if you can convince people that they won't crumble by considering that Trump sometimes is okay. I didn't say he's okay, although I'm perfectly happy to say that. But if I just say sometimes he's okay, let me talk. This is a key point, so I want to do this. One of the other pillars of the Trump derangement is that He is not to be normalized in any fashion whatsoever. Now, what is the threat of normalization? So here's the deal. Guess what? Newsflash. Donald Trump is a normal person. Okay? Now, normal has a wide range. He may be on the extreme end because he's got some huge personality things that a lot of people don't have. But by normal, I'm saying he's free of psychopathology. Does he get depressed? Maybe. Can he get anxious? Yeah. But those are emotional fluidities. Okay.
Like Marianne Williams would say, within the common range of emotions that we're supposed to have as human
Yeah,
beings.
he's got all that by all accounts. Now, I say this, obviously, I haven't talked with him personally, but every indication is you're in good intellectual acuity if you consider thing upon thing that Donald Trump is a normal person. As a normal person, that means that maybe he does some things that are okay. A deranged person cannot allow that into their psyche. Everything crumbles. And if I've seen this once, I've seen it every time. I think I told you the problem people have with me is I'm awfully reasonable and fairly likable.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So when it can come up that I may think different than they do about the Trump situation, they go into kind of a panic. I like this guy. He's been smart. He's helped me. He saved I have patients who've been very appreciative of what I've done. And I, somehow, some way, through the work that I do in the media, they know that I am making a case for understanding the Trump phenomenon. I'm not saying liking Trump. I'm saying I want you to understand the Trump phenomenon. I can see the crisis they're going into because they want to continue to like me, but how do they square the two? They can't square the two unless they understand that Trump is normal. He's normal. He's not your kind of normal. He's not your kind of guy. You don't like him for a lot of reasons, but he's normal. If you're going to criticize him for being normal, not criticize him for being not even talk. You can't even talk about him because he's to be canceled. Anything about him. So this is a very critical part of the derangement. Now, if I was not well liked, people would have no problem, understanding that I like Trump because that's the deplorables. That's what Hillary Clinton said. She said those people they like Trump because they're not people too. They're deplorables. Okay, so we can easily, dismiss the people who are just horrible people. But what do we do with the people we actually like, we love, we respect, they're smart, and they say, well, Trump's not so bad. That causes a crisis.
Yeah. I remember one of my friends that I lost after this whole thing. I would reach out to her every now and again to send her an email to try to even just talk to her because she wasn't even talking to me. She was just talking smack behind my back. And so I sent her this email one time. I said, you know what? We can jump on a Zoom anytime you want and we can have whatever conversation you want. And she said, I don't want to have a conversation. I just want my friend back. And so I think that, I say that because I think that there's like a real feeling of loss among people who have Trump derangement syndrome. But what they're not acknowledging is that it doesn't have to be that way. They don't have to lose anyone. And so what do you think is the boundary that's keeping them from doing that?
I said it. They don't know that they won't crumble. They think they'll crumble if they allow. Look. Again, I want to focus on the same thing, normalization. Trump met with Kim Jong-un, okay? The sin and the crime of that was he normalized him. The idea, now, by the way, if Obama had done it, I think people would have accepted it. They would have called him a hero and said, Obama is reaching out to this, crazy person, but at least he's trying to do something, which is exactly what I think Trump did. He's reached out to a crazy person, but he's trying to do something. But the sin was, how dare you normalize somebody who's a monster? So if the deranged people, again, it's an abstract idea, however it can be done, if they could know that they won't crumble to consider that people they really don't like a lot can still occupy the normal region of functioning.
Right.
If they know they won't crumble, then they can have a relationship with you. She would crumble if she had a relationship with you.
Yeah.
And that's why she avoids it.
I just want to thank Wings of Truth for the super sticker. Thank you for the support. Guys, if you're enjoying this video, please make sure you hit that thumbs up button. There are way more of you in the chat that have hit that thumbs up button. So I'm just asking, just take a second. It doesn't hurt. I promise. It's over quick. And it really does help me out. I also want to remind you guys that I am really trying to get to 100,000 subscribers by Election Day. I'm absolutely on track to do it. Howard is on the channel very, very regularly. So if you're enjoying this conversation, you might want to consider subscribing, turning on notifications, all that good stuff. Howard, I have a really interesting question that is not necessarily about communicating with relatives who have Trump Derangement Syndrome, but is a question that I get all the time on Twitter and through email. And I suspect we might have similar points of view on this, so I wanted to bring you into it. This is from Bruin Backhand. This is a question that was posed on YouTube. The question I have really isn't about the topic, but I would like to give Dr. Asher's views as well as yours. I'm a graduate student set to receive my MS in psychology next May and am considering applying to PhD programs so that I can become a clinical psychologist. However, the APA seems to have chosen to stand firmly with the woke political agenda. It seems like it's getting to the point where it will hinder clinicians from actually helping their clients and possibly even have recourse for failing to abide by the woke garbage. Is it a lost cause to pursue a clinical psychology, to become a clinical psychologist, or are there enough of us out there that can still hold strong and help promote change from within? What do you think, Howard?
That person needs to become a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, so they can fight the fight from within. The more people who don't go that path because the APA has perverted it and warped it, then the field just gives up and gives in to this craziness, and it means that all the psychologists will just be crazies. So I would welcome you in. Put your hazmat suit on, but we need you, because here's the deal. You and I are talking because I'm claiming some expertise and professionalism. I put it out there. I'm licensed in what I do. I've been doing this almost 50 years. And I think there's more psychologists in the field who would say different things than I'm saying. I think there's more of them than the way I am. Okay. And I'm saying welcome to everybody, but a society will look to those that claim to be experts, because sometimes we need to talk to an expert. This points out the complexity of that, because there's experts and then there's experts, but then there's the market. And so, like anything else, you can decide what doctor you want to go to. You can decide what accountant to use. You can decide what psychologist to use. And there isn't, and there shouldn't be, any one size fits all kind of psychologist.
Right.
There's going to be psychologists who have different views. If you look at the pandemic, it's another insult is, they say follow the science. Well, which ones? There are doctors who are saying certain things about how to treat the pandemic, or masks, or medicines, or distancings, or herd immunity, and there's other clinicians who are saying different things. So I would prefer a field that has a lot of different ideas. And even if you get some kind of a condition, and there's a treatment for it, there's typically the getting a second opinion. It isn't like you go to a doctor and they all have a unilateral way, just a one way of thinking and doing. So there's psychologists in my field who would be completely against everything I've told you today. They would think I'm not right. They may even think I'm nuts, all that kind of stuff. The market, you guys get to decide. So I'm encouraging, I forget the name, come into the field. We need you, I believe, if you think the way we're thinking, we need you in the field because the field needs that kind of diverse thinking about these critical issues. What's
Yeah,
your opinion?
I absolutely agree. And Bruin Backhand is in the chat and says, thank you for answering the question. No, I absolutely agree. And I want to emphasize, guys, I'm not a clinician. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. So it's a little bit different from me or from what Howard is, because there are different, like, clinicians have to play by different rules. You guys have to worry about licensure. You have to maintain like CPE credits, all that good stuff. And that's important to understand because the APA has gone exceptionally woke at this point, and frankly it's really pissing me off. Like the APA, and it's a problem not just from like for me it's more of like an annoyance because the APA does not play any role in my life at all. But if you're someone that needs to be licensed or that is in graduate school for psychology, you need to not mess with the APA because they can screw with your license, which screws with your career. And so I think that this is a very big problem that the APA has gone completely woke. I think that it's going to really hinder psychology programs and psychology students across the country from actually learning how to do what they need to do for their field. And I want to emphasize that I think that, you know, I get emails from people all the time who are in exactly the same position. And I don't think that the answer to the problem is to opt out of the system. The answer is that we need more people in the system who are of this like mind so that the voice can be represented, so that there can be people speaking up and saying there are other ways to look at this. And I think that, you know, one of the things that you know, when you go through a like a doctoral program in psychology, there you learn that there really is no one right way to look at things. There's no one right way to look at research. Howard, I don't remember. I know your program was a long time ago, but like my program, at least, like we were ripping apart research all the time and trying
Yeah,
to look at it from different perspectives.
yeah.
And so any psychologist that tells you there's only one right way to be a psychologist is absolutely lying to you, and they should not be listened to or taken seriously.
Right on. You said it right.
Excellent. It's always nice when we actually agree on things. But again, I just want to emphasize, like, you know, I would go get the PhD. Dude, say what you need to say to get the PhD. Play the game they want you to play. This is what Ben Shapiro says. You're going to have to write the papers. You're going to have to probably write something about unpacking the invisible knapsack and admitting your white privilege and all that sort of thing. Go through the motions, get the PhD. There's a lot that you do when you're in a doctoral program that doesn't have to be woke. You're going to learn lots of interesting information. You're going to meet lots of interesting people. And so I would still go for it.
Yeah, I want to underscore that to make his life a little easier. You don't need to be getting into arguments in classrooms with instructors about things. Your job is to absorb what they're telling you. You have tests to take. You have papers to make. There's no reason to be controversial. Just get your credentials. Understand. You're not even giving up. What you're doing is you're understanding. And
Yeah.
you decided you wanted to join the club, and the club has this initiation to it. So go through the initiation, but then be the clinician you want to be.
Absolutely. T. Michelle asks from YouTube, she says, is Trump derangement syndrome a pride issue? Is it symptomatic of people not willing to look again at their first impressions? Is there too much of a heavy reliance on emotion without checking it with logic? And I wanted to ask this question, Howard, because one of the most common things that I hear from people all the time is the left makes decisions with emotions, the right makes decisions with logic and reason. I don't think it's that simple. I can trigger people on the right by talking about abortion or Ruth Bader Ginsburg any single day of the week. People will become completely triggered, just like they would if they had Trump derangement syndrome. But what do you think? Is this a pride issue, or is it an issue of like logic versus emotion?
Well, I don't know if it's a pride issue other than what we were talking about before, having pride in I have the high virtue ground, maybe on that level. But as far as emotions, the emotions are the only reasons that people make decisions, left or right.
Exactly. I try to explain that to people all the time on the right, and they never believe me that they make decisions emotionally, just like the left does. Same
Yeah,
thing.
it's in the end, that's the only reason. It doesn't mean that logic isn't there, but the final position is always comes from emotions.
hmm hmm Jen Evan asks on YouTube, my question is what in America's past political climate contributed to the deep-seated hate and blatant denial we're witnessing from the left? And how did the extreme far left gain traction and validity from previously reasonable liberals? I have a theory about that, but I want to throw to you first, Howard.
Um, I think it's a real important question that I may not
Let's
understand that. Can you, ask it again, or
Yeah. We'll start with the first part of the question because I
yeah.
think this might be the crux of it. What in America's past political climate contributed to the deep seated hate and blatant denial we're witnessing from the left?
You know what? That's a terrific question. There was something that caused this. Um, and it had to do with branding, like I was talking before. What I'm stumped right in the moment is, I guess maybe I'm trying to search for a trigger flashpoint in history
Mm-hmm.
that caused it. And I don't want to be large about this. I mean, it could have been like the Kennedy assassination. Something happens to the psyche of a country when a thing happens, or 9/11, or there's these flashpoints in history, and we get so traumatized by it, we try to find our way back. And what happened was we did it through a warped sense of virtue. This is a thing I keep bringing up, is that somehow if I get to the high ground through virtue, I could get equilibrium back again. So we lost our equilibrium when Kennedy was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to come up with reasons and answers and all that kind of stuff. We had our conspiracy theories, and because we had to make sense of it. We to this day we still can't make sense of it. We won't be able to make sense of 9/11. So what happens is we start to look, at each other, like we try to find a boogeyman, and the boogeyman, the current one right now that's causing what I call a dark age, political dark age, is racism. It's because it's perfect. It's the worst thing that you could be, and you could accuse somebody of it, and if they say they're not, then that proves that they are. And it's like it's a witch hunt. That's what they did with witches. They had to purge the community. They found somebody who was oddball, and then the person said, "But I'm not an oddball." And they said, "Well, that proves you're a witch." We're doing the same thing with racism. I can't, I love, before I knew you, I didn't know that you really were, fighting the good fight against the social justice nonsense. And a part of that was the critical race theory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wrapped up in virtue that people would be afraid to attack it, because if they attack it, they'll prove they're a racist. So what am I doing? I'm attacking it. I'm taking the chance that someone's going to call me a racist, or that, or in other cases, I am a racist, but I don't know it.
Yeah.
You can't win that argument. And
Right.
and that has a chokehold on us right now. And it's taking us down and down and down. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I'm trying to convey, I think it's a real critical question. Maybe there's other answers to it, but I think there's these flashpoints that happen in history, and we start to grasp for some kind of virtue that will, get our equilibrium back.
Yeah, and I think we may have actually just gotten a super chat to provide some additional insight. I do want to thank May Rain for the super sticker, but let's take a look at the super chat that just came in. Um, Red Mage says, I'm noticing a lot of people in my generation, Generation X, now to showing this hateful behavior, and I feel I'm one of the few fair and sane people remaining. They used to be that way, and I'm wondering what happened. I mean, I kind of wonder that too. I mean, I think back to, I have to think, and I know that people on the right are probably not going to like this. I think that what Newt Gingrich did when he was Speaker of the House probably contributed to this a lot. I think there were things that W did when he was president that contributed to this a lot. I've actually heard one of the things I appreciate so much about Glenn Beck is I think he can be very self-reflective. And I've heard him do like self-reflections of, did I contribute to this division when I was on Fox News, when I was this, I mean, he's always bombastic, but he was like extra bombastic back in the day. Like, I think he wonders if he contributed to it. But I think that really the crux of the issue for me probably comes back to the education system. Like, there was some, like, I don't know when it exactly happened because this was not a part of the type of education I had, but at some point they started teaching what to think and not how to think. And maybe it was because I did my graduate work in both my master's and my PhD in online programs, which I think are frankly just like inherently better in getting people to think critically about different types of information just because of the way the programs are structured. I think they're much better than on-campus programs. But I mean, there had to have been a shift at some point where people in, I guess maybe the question is, at what point were the vast majority of university faculty members on the left? Because it's what, like 90% of them right now are on the left. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, that plays to the Vietnam War. It was again, one of those flashpoints, I mean, for a long time, and it tore the country apart. And much of the activity was on college campuses. And I grew up during that time. And I'm going to add another element to this whole thing. I'll tell you what's driving this is fashion. Fashion. Okay. I'm not talking about, fashion in terms of, how you dress, although it can mean that. It meant that virtue became a certain fashion, and you didn't want to be caught on the wrong fashion side. Okay, so you're either one thing or another. And it became scary for the attacks that you would get if you weren't the right fashion. And what's more fashionable than a college campus? It's the best thinking. It's the right way to think. It's the critical thinking. And it became the opposite of that, because what it did was it pandered to the fashion of we're woke. That was before woke was used. Before woke was used, it was political correctness. It was, we've had different names for it, but we individually, we became so scared to say, I agree with some of those things that those fashion things are about, but I don't agree with all of them. And so then if you weren't pure enough, you weren't in the right fashion. So people just, out of convenience, out of I don't want to have a problem, out of I've got friends and family, out of I want a job, I don't want any trouble. What they did was they created more trouble for themselves because they had to admit to ridiculous things more and more and more. It starts off with one stupid, ridiculous thing that doesn't mean much. And then all of a sudden, now we're, full on into every stupid idea imaginable, to the point where I'm trying to think of something stupid. It's every day in the news, there's always something that comes up that you couldn't make this up. I hate that I'm having a brain freeze right now. That there was just something the other day, and the reason for it was just stupid, and everyone bought into it. In other words, the stupid reason won.
Yeah.
We have too much stupid reasons winning.
I'm going to tell you what I think was a stupid thing that came up the other day, but I'm going to use initials for them because if I say their name, this feed will like be instantly demonetized and I'll have to go through a review process. They start with a P. The first letter starts with a P and the second one starts with a B. And it was the group that Biden wanted Trump to denounce as white supremacists. That is the
Right,
stupidest thing I've ever heard, Howard, for no
right,
other reason than the leader of that group is not white.
right, right.
It's like so dumb.
I no, it's really crazy. I just remembered the stupid thing I heard yesterday. It had some professor wrote a very woke article about the need for sports, and we have to express ourselves and all that. And then he had to take it back because he had committed a terrible sin. What was the sin? Oh, he was supporting football. If you like football, you have to be racist because most of the players, I guess, are black. By the way, there are white players,
There
but
are.
yeah, okay. But
Tom
the
Brady.
idea was you're a racist if you like football because you have black people who have to risk getting hurt playing football and risk getting COVID. So the professor not only took it back, but he in a major way apologized for how he could ever even thought that. Shame on him. He probably is not going to go to heaven now because of, I mean, it was disgusting. The level of humility that he put himself through. And what I'm saying is, so the stupid idea gets to win at the end of the day. And how, ask yourself, how much of as a culture and a society are we going to survive if all the stupid ideas win?
I think that is a great way to wrap up this conversation on. I do want to get Nathan's super chat in here. Nathan says, I pin the blame mostly on Sanders giving pinkos a foot in the door to a mainstream party. He and his ilk did do nothing and are a drain on society at large. Ironically, they played themselves. I will say, as someone who grew up in Vermont, Bernie Sanders was always around. He was always doing stuff. I don't think he's ever done anything on like a national level that's really, I mean, noteworthy, if I'm honest, because, getting universal health care has always been his thing. But, Bernie Sanders legitimately did do stuff in Vermont. So I don't want to take that away from him. All right. I mean, we've basically gone through all the questions. Oh, wait, another super chat just came in. Hang on.
Okay.
Waiting for it to pop up. Farmer Dylan said, I noticed so many of my fellow Gen Zs falling for the progressive left. How do we get them away from it? I constantly see tweets, what radicalized you? I'm worried for future generations. I'm going to be honest, Howard, I am actually not as worried about Gen Z because everything that I've seen from Gen Z, they seem to be emulating like the greatest generation in terms of like the archetype of the generation. And I mean, I've seen them questioning a lot more. So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm being naively optimistic, but what do you think?
You know what? Which one's Gen Z? Is it Gen Z, the latest, the youngest one?
The youngest one, the
Or Gen
latest.
X? Okay, okay.
They're just graduating from
So
college now.
how are the youngsters coming up? I have to say I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of agnostic about whether they're buying into this or not. I know they're exposed to it, and being a free speech person, okay, they're seeing it. I have consulted with. Actually, I feel kind of optimistic the way you do. The people I've been consulting with, the younger people, are actually bringing the current climate up to me a lot, and we're having in-depth discussions, and they seem open to going in a good direction as opposed to a crazy direction. So I don't know if it's just the people I'm talking about because they've sought me out to talk with. That could be. I don't know the general state of that generation though, and elections have consequences. I think that what could help the upcoming generation is having election go the right way.
Yeah.
So maybe that's
Well,
my political comment.
We'll see. I think generally, I mean, life is really funny. It always has a way of balancing things out. And if it was the millennial generation that lost their dang heads, maybe Gen Z is going to come across and balance that out. It doesn't always balance out as quickly as we want it to, but life always has a way of providing balance to things. Which is what makes it so interesting.
I think you're
Howard,
right.
I want to thank you for coming and having another chat on my channel. Guys, remember, on your way out the door, if you enjoyed this chat, please hit the thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to my channel. Howard is a regular, and so you will absolutely see him back. And as a reminder, Howard now has his own locals community where you can interact with him and ask him these great questions, just like we did here in the privacy of not being broadcast live on YouTube, which is probably a little bit more of an ideal way to ask in-depth questions. So please make sure you go and join Howard's local community. The link is in the description below. And if you're in my locals community, I know I have a lot of my local members here, just join Howard's as well. Locals has now made it so it's really easy to switch between communities. They've got an app. It's so much better than it used to be. So I'm having a great time on there. It's like the adult version of social media, and we need to help Howard fill up that brand new community and get some good conversation going in there. All right, guys, thank you for coming out for this live chat. Oh, by the way, PS, okay, guys, I may be on Hunter Avalon's YouTube channel later tonight at around 9 p.m. Eastern time to have a civil dialogue with him. So if you are around at 9 p.m. Eastern tonight, try to tune into his channel. I believe he's planning on live streaming it. I personally think it's a trap that I'm being lured into, but we're going to give it a go. And I'm going to give Hunter Avalon the benefit of the doubt that he actually does want to have a productive conversation. So tune in for that and be on my side in the chat if he live streams it at 9 p.m. tonight, because I think I'm going to need some backup. All right, guys, I will talk to you soon. Have a great rest of your day.